In early January every year in Galveston, Texas, we hold the Keep On Tookin conference. You remember the slogan, Keep On Truckin, from the Robert Crumb cartoon? And you remember, here are the steps we took, which are suggested as a program of recovery. Well, once we've taken the 12 steps, our job is to keep on tookin. We have main speakers, panels with attendee participation, and, this year, Father Tom from Oakland, California, who is AA and Al-Anon. There is also a Q&A session as the last session of the weekend. As the recordings are available, I will upload them here as a guest spot on the podcast.
And the backup.
All right.
You're good. We will open with the Serenity Prayer. All together. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So let's welcome back Father Tom.
I find it helpful to read the literature. And when new literature comes out, I read it. And sometimes I don't think we need any new literature, and then I'm upset. However, new things come out, and I'm glad for them. There's a plain language big book that's out. And I was opposed to it without seeing it because it's new and therefore wrong. But I have made use of it a little bit myself, and my practical experience of it is this: a lot of people don't read easily, and a lot of people don't have English as their first language, and it's a simplified book. A lot of the very weird grammar and punctuation of the original text is simplified. Many fewer semicolons, for example. When was the last time you used a semicolon? And so I find it to be a practical thing. There's in church history, there are centuries and centuries that people can argue and scream and be upset with each other. And original Old Testament, New Testament, was Greek language for the New Testament and Hebrew language for the Old Testament. And then a group of Jewish scholars translated the Hebrew Bible into Greek called the Septuagint. And it was used for centuries as the basic text. And then Jerome translates that into Latin so people in the West can read it. And every time there's a translation, there's a fist fight in the parking lot, just so you know. And in the 1400s, 1500s, people like Martin Luther and a few others are saying Scripture should be in ordinary language. So Martin Luther translates it into German. In a way, he doesn't invent the German language, but he puts it down in print. And there were so many different German dialects, he kind of stabilizes the Germans. And then in England, there was a fellow who translated something into English, and they burned him at the stake. This was high-stakes stuff. And then King James comes along, and James, the Puritans translated. They have a Puritan translation, and this group has a translation, and that group has a translation. And King James wanted a translation that would stress the kingship of God and the authority of the king. So there's an awful lot of royal language in the King James. And then it took the Catholics another 400 or 500 years to say, maybe the vernacular is not so bad. Can you use ordinary language to speak about that which is sacred, is the question. Must you know Arabic to read the Quran? Must you know Hebrew to read Isaiah? Must you know Greek to read Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John? Or can we do this in ordinary speech? It's a whole... And if you talk to translators and people who do cultural translation stuff, these are fascinating people. It's a small book that I read years ago called Hebrew Thought Compared to Greek, which is Old Testament going into the Greek language. And the Hebrew language is very concrete and a small vocabulary, and there's not a lot of abstract anything there. And the Greeks have a brilliant vocabulary with 100,000 nuances and variations, and it can make your head spin. So there. So I like a good translation, and it's hard to translate. It's hard to translate some things. But I have studied a bit of Greek and Latin. I'm not good at either one of those. Because I didn't fall in love with the subject. This is the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, page 23. That topic is done. New topic, 23. This says there is a solution. Almost none of us liked the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, the confession of shortcomings, which the process requires for its successful consummation. The inventories, the fourth and fifth step. Who wants to do that? But we saw that it really worked in others, and we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it. Are you ready to learn some new skills? When, therefore, we were approached by those in whom the problem had been solved, there was nothing left for us but to pick up the simple kit. This is reading. It's not quite the glasses in between. I'm too tall for the book. The simple kit of spiritual tools that laid at our feet. We have found much of heaven, and we have been rocketed into a fourth dimension of existence of which we had not even dreamed. In the plain language, they dropped out fourth dimension because it's so weird. So what's the fourth dimension? If we have been rocketed there... So I was at a meeting, and when I'm at meetings, I find it helpful to listen to others. And every so often I'm caught by surprise. Because I think I know what the person's going to say. And then I'm caught by surprise. And this page was being discussed, and evidently Albert Einstein talked about the fourth dimension. The first three dimensions: length, width, height. The fourth dimension is time. Learning how to live in the present is living in the fourth dimension. Not being trapped in the past or paralyzed by the future, but learning how to be here now, learning how to do this a day at a time, learning how to take a breath and realize that that's living. Is a real change in my brain. Learning how to be... I'm much less anxious if I'm here today. I'm very anxious if I look at the next 300 years. But today's fine. The fourth dimension. So, Bill Wilson spoke a lot. There's even a book called As Bill Sees It. Not one of my favorite pieces of literature. Bill had an opinion on everything, and if you said, Bill, talk about the moon being made out of blue cheese, he would have for an hour. Bill Wilson. Dr. Bob hated public speaking and didn't like public speakers. So that's two very different people. But Bill had, there's a piece of literature that came out a few years ago called Our Great Responsibility. And it's a selection of Bill W.'s General Service conference talks. Boring, gray cover. Why would you ever read this? Because it is fascinating. And Bill has a way of telling a tale. He has a funny little accent, kind of Midwestern, and there's a kind of speaking style in the 1940s and 50s, which is kind of rah, 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 rah. Rah, 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 rah. But if you can get beyond that, he's fascinating. And this is what he says. This is on the section from a talk he gave in 1953. I think I was 6 years old. That was the substance of the steps. You admitted you were a drunk. You got honest with yourself. You got honest with somebody else. You made restitution for the harm you'd done. You worked with other people without demand for reward. You depended on whatever God you thought there was, and you prayed to him for help to carry this thing. That was the thing in a nutshell up to the time the big book came out. There are 6 steps. In one of the short stories in the book, the story of one of the first people from Chicago who gets sober. And Chicago drunks are terrible drunks. This is the short story called He Sold Himself Short. It's on page 263. He and Dr. Bob are working together, or Dr. Bob is talking to him. The 6 steps: complete deflation, dependence and guidance from a higher power, moral inventory, confession, restitution, continued work with other alcoholics. The 6 steps, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. Bill, page 93. I remember having a tablet of yellow paper there, and I said, God, this book has got to go on. How will we ever finish it? I don't know. If you're a writer yourself, I don't have to explain this to you. But lots of times people start writing a book and they can never finish it. They start writing it and they get lost in it. If you've been in graduate school at all, the dissertation, it is a crucifixion. Getting that thing done, organizing it, passing it by readers. Everyone has an opinion. They don't like this, change that. It is a nightmare. I could write a book. I could not write a book. I don't have the patience or the tolerance to put up with the process. It's a process. God, this book has got to go on. How we will ever finish it, I don't know. Then he said, then as now, I had no confidence whatever in my writing. It did occur to me that this word-of-mouth program was not quite specific and definite enough for the distant reader. If you could buttonhole a drunk and put it up to him by word of mouth, very well. But we had begun to dream that this book might carry the message to people in distant places. And on the principle of the book, fortified by a little correspondence or an occasional traveler dropping by, new groups might be formed. And knowing the tendency of the drunk to rationalize, we felt that the chunks of truth in the 6 steps of the word-of-mouth program were too big, that you'd have to break it up in smaller pieces, so the son of the gun couldn't duck any essential point. And that could form the backbone for the next 2 or 3 chapters of the book, where you'd explain specifically the applications that experience had suggested. So I commenced to write out the steps. And they were done, to my surprise, and despite my rotten state of mind, rather quickly. It was only when I numbered them that I found there were 12. And I thought, well, that's kind of a happy thought. I mean, 12, you know, is a nice number, both in numerology and religion. 12 apostles, 12 months, 12 signs of the zodiac. That's all I thought about that. Then looking it over, I found that we had introduced the subject of God way up the line there in that third step, instead of sneaking it in at the tail end. Why it was put up there, I still don't know, but it was. Well, when those 12 steps were presented to the meeting in New York, all hell broke loose. I had committed a heresy. Why did we have to have 12 steps when 6 were just as good? In other words, my sin was that I had varied the 6 steps of the AA program now into 12. We had a big hassle over those 12 steps, whether they ought to be 12 or 6. And out of that hassle came one great big 10 strike, which I think is a good thing, a bowling term. You'll remember I had a very sudden religious experience. In those days, I was more pious than I am now. I use the word God very freely. We had some people who, however, didn't agree with that, our agnostic contingent. Well, there was a bunch of fellows around who said, well, we should write a book more or less along psychological lines and get these drunks sucked in here and then sneak the God idea up on them afterwards. They didn't want any mention of God in the book at all. I had these 12 steps pretty much stocked up with the word God. But as the result of an awful lot of hassle, we got around to the idea of the higher power, or God as you understand it. And that was no invention of mine. It just came out of a lot of arguing about this thing. So that's the way the 12 steps originated. And as I point out, there were tremendous variations, not in principle, but in the number and the manner of stating the original word-of-mouth program. And then he goes on. He'll mention Jesuits, as a matter of fact. Let me put in a plug. Time went by, and to our immense surprise, Jesuits came in, and they said, well, these 12 steps are in principle exactly like our Ignatian exercises for retreat. Moreover, they're stated in the same order. As more time passed, psychiatrists looked it over, and although they had found some fault with it, they said, well, this stuff isn't half bad. At any rate, it's working. So there's a process to all this stuff, you know? I've heard someone say that the big book came kind of like faxed from heaven, you know, every word perfect. And that's not the process at all. It's argued about and toyed about. There's a chapter for wives written by Bill Wilson. Can I repeat that? There was a wife that wrote a chapter, but Bill said, what does she know? And so Bill wrote the chapter to wives. And a lot of the chapter to wives comes down to stand by your man. That's chapter to wives. I've been to a couple of the international Al-Anon conventions. They have one every 5 years. I've been to the one in Vancouver, BC, and I've been to the one in Baltimore. I was going to go to the one in Albuquerque. I had every hope of going there. I bought a ticket. I had a hotel room. I wrote people. I said, I'll see you there. And then the morning I was flying there, I got a message from United Airlines. I'm married to United Airlines. And they said, your flight has been canceled and you can't get there today or tomorrow. So I fussed with the internet and looked around. And I could get there Saturday, but the conference is over Sunday. And so I stayed home. But I mentioned at the meeting that I tried to go and flight was canceled. And one of my spiritual friends said, well, I guess God didn't want you to go to the Albuquerque convention. And I said, I think you have God mixed up with United Airlines. 600 flights were canceled out of Denver that day. It had nothing to do with me. So Al-Anon. I come into Al-Anon tired and angry. I mentioned that before. And I come in as a teacher who's arguing with young people all the time. And you don't want to argue with young people. The last thing most kids need is someone else to yell at them. But I became that person. So it was time to leave the classroom, and I did in 1981. My first trip into Al-Anon. Joining Al-Anon is a lot like stopping smoking. You know, you stop and start, and then you finally stop, right? Well, Al-Anon, we put our toe in and take it out, and toe in and take it out. I had someone refer to himself as a tea bag Al-Anon. I only go to Al-Anon when I'm in hot water. That was the image. So I moved, and I started going to Al-Anon again, and I'm trying to figure it out. Same 12 steps. But for me, getting Al-Anon was like trying to grab smoke. I could see it, but what's going on? And I go to meetings and started when I was about 10 years sober doing some work with families. And there are some reasons in my family to join Al-Anon. And I used to talk about that a lot, but it's not very interesting. But that doesn't mean I won't talk about it. If it's really boring, a good teacher will take that for an hour, but you don't have to do that here. Someone gave me a cassette tape. Another teacher named Sally F. gave me a cassette tape of a woman from Texas by the name of Blanche D. And Blanche was an English teacher out in Permian Basin High School, Odessa, Midland, which I've been to. I've been to both of those places. I can't tell them apart, but they don't like each other. And I still can't tell them apart. One looks down on the other for various reasons. I don't know why. Here we are. Anyway, outside issue. Blanche grew up in northern Florida, wanted to go to college, and she wanted to go to Baylor University here in Texas. And her family didn't want her to go to college because if you go to college, you'll be a communist. But they finally gave her the okay, but she had to work her way through school, and she did. She came to Baylor. Her mother said, if you go to Texas and go to school there, you're going to marry a Texan, and you'll never leave Texas because they do not transplant. And then Blanche said, I did, and we did, and I have. So she's lived her whole life in Texas after that. But Blanche said in her talk, when she was growing up, there were things she was taught that just were not true. One of them was, what you don't know can't hurt you. And she said, listen, what I did not know about alcoholism almost killed 4 people. She was also taught God helps those who help themselves. And she said that's not true either. God helps those who ask. I found both of those really important for my own understanding. And then she told her story. And she at Baylor, she met another guy. She said she was addicted to mood-altering men. I like that phrase very much. And this tall, handsome man named Charles, and he too, Baptist background, he never had a drink in his life, and she never had a drink in her life, and they got married and started their families, and he had his first drink. It explodes, the disease took off. And she became as frantic and unhappy and wild as you could be. And he gets some help, and she gets some help. She died in the year 2000 of a freak car accident. But there's a lot of recordings of Blanche giving talks, and I highly recommend her. I listened to her, and I put that cassette in my car and played it over and over and over again. She helped clarify stuff for me. And this is the key that opened the Al-Anon door for me. She said, in Al-Anon, we learn how to keep our sails out of other people's wind. Now, there's a lot of wind blowing. And I used to love to be in the hurricane. The drama and the excitement and the urgency and the, oh my goodness, a hospital, you know. I would get high off that stuff. And the laws of physics apply. What goes up comes down. And what makes you high will bring you down. And I come in, again, pretty exhausted and worn out. From reactions, I used to watch, there was a TV series in the 1950s called The Mickey Mouse Club. And it was on every day at 5 o'clock. And you'd watch the Mouseketeers running around, Darlene and Bobby and all the Sharon and all these little Mouseketeers with ears. And Friday was Science Day, and they would show us something scientific to help us understand anything. And they wanted to talk about chain reactions. So they had a room full of mouse traps, and each trap was set and 2 ping pong balls on each mouse trap. There were really 1,000 mouse traps. And then they took a ping pong ball and threw it in, and it triggered one, and then it triggered 50, and then suddenly there's 10,000 ping pong balls in the air. And that's how I lived. That was how I responded to being alive. Frenzy, activity, emotion. Wow, aren't I having a great time? The first Al-Anon slogan I grabbed onto as a lifesaver was act, don't react. Act, don't, because I'm a reactor. I'm very intuitive. I'm the youngest kid. I picked up stuff. I knew what people were thinking and feeling. One of my Al-Anon pals will talk about his level of craziness, and very intuitive and very smart. That doesn't always help. He would think about the coming week, especially any emergencies or crises, and he would know what everybody in the coming week was going to be thinking and feeling, all just by sitting in his chair all by himself. Yeah. That makes you very crazy, because you don't know what's going to, but he had the whole week planned with his emotional life all sorted out by Sunday night, and no wonder he had no friends and he was unhappy and he couldn't sleep. And he had to learn how to be in the present and act rather than react, because I don't want to be reacting to crazy because it's everywhere. The line in the book, and this is something I just learned in the last few months. I'm a West Coast person. We have earthquakes, not tornadoes. So I'm perfectly used to earthquakes. But tornadoes, the very thought scares me to death. I saw one in The Wizard of Oz, and I'm sure that's when I became an alcoholic. The way tornadoes, the alcoholic is a tornado going through the life. Tornadoes, I just learned, suck up everything into them. You get pulled into the tornado and blown out on the other side of Mars. And an alcoholic can just pull you into the circle and then, oh, I don't want to do that. I can still get into trouble because I'm attracted to deeply crazy. But I notice I'm in trouble sooner. I remember I had a little bit of Al-Anon behind me, and I got a phone call one night, 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, and a fellow I had met at a meeting a month before in Santa Cruz, 2 hours away from me, had just been arrested for the sale and possession of cocaine. And he had my phone number, and he needed to be bailed out. And would I come and bail him out? And I said, I don't, how much? And he said, $1 billion. I said, I don't have it. And he said, well, they said you could bring the deed to your house. I'm in complete confusion. I'm feeling stimulated, this sounds good to me. Maybe there'll be a cop involved, police, how exciting. And my heart's pounding. But I learned, pause. And I said, let me call you back, which is an Al-Anon slogan, let me call you back. And then I called a couple people. I was very aware of the fact that I need to talk to grown-ups because I'm enchanted. This is, help me. And I called my sponsor and a few other people, and I said, this is what's going on. And each one of them said, he's in jail for the sale and possession of cocaine. This is not a martyr. This is a criminal. He's supposed to be in jail. It's why we pay taxes. And I got that message from more than one person. I called him back and I said, I could not help him. I can't help you. And we finished the conversation and I went to the bathroom and threw up. I want to help. But I really need to talk to grown-ups because I don't know a lot of stuff. I get entranced by the drama. So I guess I'm in my late 40s, early 50s by now, and I make the decision that I want to spend my life without trauma and without drama. And that's a lot of my Al-Anon stuff. I want a simple, ordinary life. I don't want real high because it's followed by real low. I want to live in the broad middle. One day at a time. One day at a time. The second step I mentioned this morning is all about hope for me. And it's a process. I think it's a process. I'm never really very hopeful. If I've got about 27 to 34% hopeful, I'm fine. I can walk around and return phone calls and shower. I can get to a meeting. Below 11% hopeful, and they have to come and get me and take me to a meeting because I can't remember to go there. And over that, if I get giddy. I stopped doing all the footwork because I don't have to do anything. I'm so hopeful. So I just need enough hope to live a practical, simple life. I saw a wonderful therapist early in my sobriety, and his name was Leonard, and his parents were Russian Jews, and his mother was a real Russian Jewish communist. It was thrilling to meet her. I was the first priest she served borscht to. It was quite a breakthrough in that family. Leonard and I did become friends, and we spent. But he saved my life in many ways. And I was talking to him about being crazy, being restored to sanity, being crazy. And I remember my friend Mary C., long sobriety, alcoholic, compulsive overeater, and she's found recovery in AA and Gray Sheet OA, so she doesn't fool around, plus Al-Anon. Those are her programs. Weighs and measures, she's very happy, 70 pounds off for 20 years. But Mary would talk to her sponsor and say things like, I'm so crazy, I'm so crazy. And after about a month or two of that, the sponsor said, what kind of crazy? Are you crazy tired, or are you crazy scared, or are you crazy angry? We have to build the vocabulary, so I get a little more data. I'm so crazy. He gives very little information. So I was talking with Leonard about families and stuff, and I asked him, Leonard, do you think I'm normal? And he said to me, normal is 98.6. For you Europeans, that's 37. Okay? They use a false thermometer there, and I don't know how they tell time even. But normal is a temperature, 98.6. And I was able to say, I'm 29 years old now. I've been to school. I have a little bit of sobriety. I've been to meetings. I said, I don't even know what I want to ask. He said, I think you want to ask if you're healthy. How do you know you're healthy? Restored to sanity. And I said, how do you know? And he said, well, Leonard had Freudian tendencies. He said, Freud said that a healthy person could work and love. Those were the qualities of health. And then he said, if you could manage that, you can live with the ordinary level of misery. Those happy Viennese, 1920. And he said, since Freud, we've learned a few things, he said, I like working and loving and playing. If you could work, love, and play, you're a pretty healthy person. And I said, say more, because I'm not getting it. Working, being able to show up on time, do your job, fulfill your requirements, leave on time, clean up after yourself. If you can do that, you're a reliable person and you can be counted on. That's being able to hold down a job. And I had trouble with that. I would get bored and I would put the job down and start another one and then get bored and start another one and have 5 unfinished jobs. I'm capable of that behavior. And he said, let's get a few things done first before we start another project, learning how to work. Also, I've noticed that a number of us, when we've got a couple of years in recovery, we change careers. I sponsored a guy that ran Charlie's Garage in Berkeley, an honest garage. And a whole bunch of sober people went to Charlie's Garage. And then Charlie came to his first AA meeting. It was the nightmare. What happens if you go to an AA meeting and everyone you know is already there? And he almost ran out the door. They'll know. Charlie, come on in and get sober. Good program. And I'm his sponsor. And Charlie was about 50 years old. Sober now 2 or 3 years. And he said, I need to talk to you. And I said, about what? He said, well, I want to change my career. He said, I'm done working with cars. I want to go back to school. I want to learn computers. I want to work with my head more than my hands. And my first thought was, where will I take my car? So I told him about not changing, a major change for the first 30 years of your recovery. And then maybe, if your sponsor's dead, you can do that. But he did. He changed. I know Al-Anon nurses who've worked in the emergency room for 20 years because it's just like home. And they come into Al-Anon and move over to geriatrics or pediatrics. I left the classroom. I could no longer be there. We learn new skills. We change careers. We become more grown up. Here, this was years ago in Texas. I spoke at something here 100 years ago. And I got a chance to know a fellow named Billy Bailey. Dr. Billy Bailey. And he was sober a long time, and he was my introduction to Texas gentlemen. Older generation. He and his wife. His wife's name was Mary Love, and she was called Mary Love. Not Mary, Mary Love. So there I am in the heart of old Texas. Texas royalty is what I'm surrounded by. He was Lyndon Johnson's physician. And they had a couple of beers together now and again over the years. Anyway, I met Dr. Billy Bailey, Billy B, and he was a physician, and I discussed a few things, and he started out being a lawyer. He was a lawyer who became a doctor. And I said, how does that happen? He says, well, I was 5 years sober, and I decided I no longer wanted to spend the rest of my life based on a decision made by a 12-year-old boy. As a 12-year-old, he wanted to be a lawyer. As a grown-up, he wanted to be... So you change. Learning how to work. Learning how to be responsible. Learning how to participate. Learning how to be creative. Loving. Oh my goodness. When I'm in Los Angeles, you have to be very clear on this subject. I'm not talking about getting laid. Half the room says, "What?" They've never heard the difference. Some of us have been sexual with people we would not have coffee with. So acknowledge that. We're talking about loving, and loving is about, and this is a program thing my sponsor would talk about, friends, companions, allies. Friends, companions, allies. Rather than being isolated, alone, me against the world. Learning how to be friends with people, learning how to be allies, learning how to be companions. I was 10 or 20 years sober, and I did a bit of an inventory on my relationship area, and I found I didn't have any friends. I had clients. I had people I could do something for, especially if they were pathetic. And as you Texas people, if someone was feeling puny, I think that's a Texas phrase, I'm happy to be their friend and fix them and get them on their feet. And then when they started being okay again, I'd lose interest and drop them. This is not being a friend. This is being, I'm looking for a project. Hi, what's your name? I'm looking for a project. And my sponsor said, I need to start spending time with people I can't do very much for, except breathe the air together. Learning how to be friends. It's not about running people's lives or having tons of advice or being dominated. Blanche would talk about, in Al-Anon, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. Instead of, I'm the one who helps. That was a 5 to 8 year project. Not easy at all. I had to very consciously work on things like this. Blanche also said, I sometimes forget this, it's one of her darker quotes. The horns in the head of the alcoholic match the holes in the head of the Al-Anon. She would say that. You're not laughing. But I thought, that explains some of my craziness. But learning how, in Paul's letter to the Corinthians, he has a whole bunch of things there. Talks about loving. And there's a whole long list of things, but the first two are love is patient, love is kind. With great skin and hair. No. Love is patient, love is kind. And that's not a bad way to start learning how to be loving. The kindness part, the patience part. Patience, there's a Latin root there. Patior is the deponent verb. And it means to be uncomfortable. It means to suffer. That's right, to be uncomfortable. And the patients in people in the hospital are called patients because they're suffering. The virtue of patience is to be able to suffer, to be uncomfortable without calling suicide prevention or emergency or a gun. Can I just be uncomfortable for a while in this relationship with my parents or my partner or my kids? Can I just be uncomfortable for a while? I am not a married man, but I've watched a lot of you people. And there's a lot of give and take in that relationship of comfort, discomfort. What can you put up with? And I'm amazed at. So, young married couple, and they think they've grown all they can. And then they have their first kid. And suddenly, they're not sleeping, they're not eating. I mean, they are there for another. And the growth that happens. Also, they're exhausted and cranky for the next 10 years, but that's the price you pay. Oh my goodness, to love. To go without sleep, to take the kid to emerge. I mean, all that stuff. I'm in amazement of the stuff of loving. I led a retreat in Phoenix a few years ago, and couple, I'd known them for a while. They'd been together for a while. He got very ill. one of the disability illnesses, Parkinson's something. He became very difficult for him to move and get around. And he was still able to get around a little bit, and his wife was with him, and he was in the wheelchair, and she was pushing him around. And it occurred to me, that's what love looks like. You know? I am going way out of my way for someone I love. And it's because I love him. Al-Anon is a very interesting dance, I find. Working and love and play, learning how to play is a crucial part of recovery. That part in the book is already mentioned a couple of times. Be happy, joyous, and free. Avoid the deliberate manufacture of misery, which is a crucial line in the big book, along with do not be discouraged. Learning how to play, and I had no idea how to do that. I knew recreational vehicles and recreational drugs, and drinking was always entertainment for me. How do you do this sober? I went to my first Christmas party sober. Terrified. Smoke, thank God I could still smoke. And I kept going in and out, in and out, in and out. And in that little yellow and white book, Living Sober, it says, have something in a glass, have that in your hand. And you just hold on to that. Learning how to enjoy, learning how to take pleasure in. So Leonard the Shrink said to me, what do you like to do for laughs? And I said, I go to meetings. And he said, I'm glad to hear it. What do you do for laughs? We laugh at meetings. Ha ha ha. We are chippy, happy, wonderful people at meetings. And he says, Tom, if you don't learn how to have a good time sober, you're not going to stay sober. Which opens up a whole new category of insecurity and fear. Because how do I know what I like to do? You have to try stuff. Do you like live music? I don't know. Why don't you go and hear some I don't know if I can. There was a band called Chicago, and they were playing at the Hollywood Bowl. This is in the late 70s, early 80s. They were playing at the Hollywood Bowl, and a bunch of us sober people, 6 of us went together. We were the only people there not smoking marijuana. But I heard Chicago play live, and it was wonderful. I also held my breath a lot because I was so afraid I would get a contact high and end up doing something despicable. Do you like the beach? I don't know. Why don't you go? Do you like making models? Do you like painting? Do you like playing something? Do you like cooking? Do you like gardening? Try 50 different things and see if there's a couple of things you like. And that, for me, was at least a 10-year process of learning how to, what do I like, what don't I like? And I found there are some things I don't like to do at all, and I don't do them. It's a great freedom. Working, loving, playing. If I'm working, if I'm loving, if I'm playing, I'm being restored to sanity by a power greater than myself. And my experience of step 2, it's not that I figured it out and then acted on it, but rather I noticed changes going on in me, and I concluded a power greater than myself was making some changes. I didn't do it, but I cooperated with it. In the meeting, sometimes we chant a lot. I don't know if you do that here, but keep coming back. It works if you work as you work. All that, another 10 minutes long of meeting. I had a person at a meeting say, keep coming back. It works if you let it. Because there's power in the program. I just need to cooperate with the power in the program. Let it be. Invite it in. It's a New Testament reference, but sometimes that grace energy is referred to as yeast or mustard seed. They're really tiny and small, but they'll change everything. if you let them. Step 3, there's a third step prayer written in King James. I don't know whether you noticed that. Art wheretofore, semicolon, thus. It's a pretty good prayer. Relieve me of the bondage of self. When I first heard that, I didn't need anyone to explain that to me. Blanche, and again, Blanche, my Al-Anon mentor, we did meet and we did become friends. She stayed at my house, I stayed at her house. We had the same sense of humor and we resented some of the same people, so we got along fine. Blanche. She'll talk about growing up, kids, and you protect yourself, you defend yourself. Because there's a lot of threatening things out there. You know, you need approval from parents and this group and that group and teachers. So you learn how to do what you're good at really well. And some of us find out that I was the smart Western boy. So I lived in my head a lot. I was quick. I could learn more quickly than my 2 older brothers. That helped a lot in our relationship, I assure you. It didn't. There was a lot of stuff. But some people are really good at sports, so they sport. Some people are really good at math. They math. Some people are good. They're really pretty, and they don't have to do anything else because they're pretty or they're handsome, and they get their way. That works great until you're 26. And now you have new skills to develop, you know? I did the smart boy thing for a long time, and this is the way Blanche would explain it. Those coping mechanisms that helped us so much when we were small get in the way when we're adolescents and cripple us when we're adults. You have to find other ways of coping. It's like we build ourselves a castle or a fortress, and here's the language of the program, we then find ourselves in a self-constructed prison. And how do I get out of a self-constructed prison? I cannot help myself. If I could, I would never have to meet you. Or a power greater than myself. Well, before I deal with the higher power, I need to figure the higher power out. That's not true. Let God be God. You don't have to figure it out. God knows what God is doing. Relax. And just invite the higher power in. For the second and third step, this is not where we get degrees in philosophy and theology. You can do that later. But right now, you just need a friend who can help you get through the bondage of self. We ask for guidance on a regular basis. And sometimes I get good guidance and sometimes I get bad guidance. It depends on who's talking. Sometimes I listen and sometimes I don't listen. Inspiration, guidance, a power greater than ourselves. Transformation, letting go. Letting go. The practical work for me, in Narcotics Anonymous for step 3 and step 7, they use the same words. Take my will in my life, guide me in my recovery, show me how to live. Isn't that 3 nice, simple sentences? No semicolons? I'm not against semicolons. I just haven't used one since Clinton was president. You know? Take my will in my life, guide me in my recovery, show me how to live. But the work of step 3 for me is this. Whether I do this on my knees or standing, I've got to show up. I have to be here. I have to pay attention. I have to show up get out of my head, get out of my room, get out of my isolation. I need to show up. I need to pay attention, focus. What's going on? What are people saying? What are people feeling? What's the action? What's happening here? I need to pay attention. I need to tell the truth about what I'm thinking, feeling, what I see. Tell the truth. And then I let go of the results. I let go of the results. My job is to show up, pay attention, and tell the truth. And if I do that, God, as I understand God, does whatever God does. And something happens. Frequently, something I don't expect. Frequently, something I'm angry at. That shouldn't have happened. But I'm not in charge of the results. When my sponsor, his last years, he got a dementia diagnosis in his early 70s. His mom had it. So he knew it was there. He was very aware of, he had a very nimble mind, and he was quite aware of anything funny going on in there. And he continued talking at meetings. He talked about dementia. He said, I've been diagnosed with dementia. He was at a meeting and he said, I'm Terry, I'm an alcoholic, and I'm losing my mind. Of course, they all laughed, ha, ha, ha. And then he said, I've got a picture. And it was the MRI, the scan of it, and the short-term memory part's pretty dark. He was never afraid. He was never angry. He was never ashamed. It was simply what was true. And he'd talk about it, and he'd talk about it. You don't have to pretend. And he said, I have a program and a power greater than myself, and it's somehow going to work out. And, so I do this a day at a time. I went to see him. If there were 3 or 4 people talking in the room, he couldn't follow. He'd get lost. This is about 7 years into dementia. If there were a couple of topics, he couldn't follow. But if it was one-on-one and one topic, he was right there. So I learned how to talk to him after getting over my panic that he was disappearing. And I said, I want to let go of some things. I'm too busy. I have this project and that project, and I'm not going to do that anymore or that anymore. And he listened, and he said, oh, no. He said, that's good. I approve of all that. And then he said, some things we let go of, some things are taken away. Yeah, I wrote that down. Then he spoke at a meeting, and he was still able to talk about sobriety, of course, because that's old and long memories. He had over 50 years when he died. And he said about recovery, it's not a question of trying harder, it's a question of resisting less. And I wrote that down too. I try to resist less. I don't have to fight everything all the time. Step 3. Do you do this once or do you do this daily? Yes, keep it up. We turn things over. When I'm caught by surprise, if the technology changes, if the rules change, I find I have fear and anger. They come up right for me. And I still have those. Well, I'm going to talk about defects of character a little bit more this evening. If you know of anybody who has some defects of character, you can invite them to see them. But to do this a day at a time, breathing, connected to a power greater than ourselves, through work and through love and through play, is a joy. There's life here, there's delight here, there's humanity. Just one more note on learning how to play. Working and loving can take a lot of energy. They can be hard work. Recreation and play is the stuff I do that recharges my batteries. And I might recharge very differently than someone else. You have to find your own way of what feeds you and what encourages you and what helps you. And it can be very different even for best friends. But you have to respect how you recharge and how you play One, I knew a great big guy, huge hands. His favorite thing was making model planes. Those little, with glue, and these tiny little, he loved it. Making ships in a bottle, he loved it. It gave him great joy. And I almost said to him, "You're too big to do things like that." But thank God I had a perfect Al-Anon program at the time. And I kept my big fat mouth shut, which is one of the signs of having a perfect Al-Anon program. I'm done.
Thank you again. We have a break until 3, but we're going to close with the Lord's Prayer. I want to remind you about that wonderful silent auction tables. Oh, those wonderful silent auction tables. See you back at 3. Let's close with the Lord's Prayer where you're at. All together. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory,